Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles people who are passionate about what they do for a living, what organization they belong to, or the community they are a part of. Here is your host, Dave Cunningham.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Artificial intelligence. It's shaping our world in ways we can see and in many ways we can't. From the algorithms first imagined by thinkers centuries ago to the machines now learning, predicting, and creating alongside us, AI is no longer science fiction. It's part of our everyday lives. But how did we get here? Who built the foundation? And just as important, where are we headed next? Today we explore a new book on the topic, Artificially Intelligent, the very human story of AI, with its author, David Eliot. We'll trace the origins of AI through history's great thinkers, unpack how it's already embedded into our everyday lives, and tackle the big questions around power, control, and responsibility. This episode was recorded in December of 2025. Let's get to my conversation with David Eliot. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here, Dave. I'm excited to be here discussing with you and your audience.
I appreciate you taking the time. Let's start with this. I asked two different AI platforms for a definition of AI. And one said AI is a branch of computer science focused on creating systems that can perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. And the other one said AI is the capability of computer systems to perform tasks such as learning, reasoning, problem solving, and decision making. Not much talk of real human involvement in those definitions. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's a big problem with AI and the way we talk about it in general is definitions. Because it's one of those things that when we normally think about technology, it's easy to define. If I ask you what a cell phone is, you point to your cell phone. If I ask you what a toaster is, you can point to a toaster. AI is different. AI doesn't have a clear definition, and it makes it really difficult to talk about. And stuff like these divisions that you have here, they really make it hard to have intelligent conversations, especially in politics, because you'll have two people yelling at each other and then realize they just both have a different definition of AI and actually agree on all the actual things. But as you say, the human part is missing from here. In the one side, the first definition looks at it as AI being able to do the things that a human can do, and that's what makes it intelligent. But that also kind of separates humans out from the rest of the world and makes us seem as if we are different from other actions. We are different from other intelligent things because, I talk about in this book, the cuttlefish. And the cuttlefish is an intelligent being that can do amazing things that a human cannot do. I mean, it can sense its environment and change its color to match its environment without eyes. That is incredibly intelligent in my definition. But if a machine could do that, we wouldn't call it intelligent because a human can't. It's just a very weird, fickle area when we start trying to define AI and figure out exactly what it is.
Too simple to say, and many might say this, that all of this AI stuff is just magic.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you know, and
I had to throw that in. I noticed, tell people that you were a very successful magician, did shows right across the country. Talk about the transition from doing magic to studying AI.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because I think one of the first magic shows I ever did was for the Scouts group that you were one of my Scouts masters in. So a funny connection for your listeners who might not know that. But yeah, the transition from magic into AI was really interesting because at first I thought I was leaving the magic world behind. I thought I was getting out of it. It wasn't going to really come into play at all. And I was shocked the more I've studied AI, the more I've seen the connection with magic, mainly in the way we react to it. Because when you see a really good magic trick, it feels like magic because you don't know how it works. And AI feels the same way. You see it. That first time you use ChatGPT or Gemini, it really feels like magic. But the thing about a good magic trick is it's actually quite simple. When you pull back the curtain, they're usually very simple tricks. You might not be able to do them because you need years of practice to learn the sleight of hand, but how they actually work is really simple. But it's the mystery that gives it its power over you. It's the mystery that gives it the ability for an audience to sit there and be wondered, be manipulated. And with AI, I think it's the same because when we don't understand how it works, when the average person right now sits down and sees ChatGPT or sees Gemini or sees another AI system and thinks it's magic and feels like it's magic because they don't understand how it works, it gives people power over them. It gives AI companies power over them. It gives the people who control this technology power over them. But if we just pull back the curtain and show how it actually works, which again, I think is actually quite simple, you couldn't program one of these systems by knowing how it works. You need a lot of specialized skill to do that. But if you just know the foundations of what makes it work, you begin to gain power back in your life because you begin to advocate for how you want to see these systems used. You begin to be able to question them, to ask where they should be used, how they should be used, and maybe even how they should be regulated. So that was a big mission of mine when I made that realization was I think that it's the responsibility of people like me, people working in this technological world, to pull back that curtain for the everyday person, to do the thing that I don't think we should do in magic, because I think magic should stay a secret. But I think AI and the secrets of AI, they belong to everybody. And everybody should be able to understand them, to understand how it affects their life and be able to advocate for themselves.
Now, you are working on your PhD and the focus is AI. Why did you feel that this was the time to write the book?
It's an interesting one because I started working on this book actually in 2019, the first version of this book, which was very different. And at that time, nobody was talking about AI. It was one of those things where actually my original research, I had some, let's say, heated discussions with academics about whether or not it was even, you know, wise to study AI, whether or not it was even a thing. And I was sitting there looking at all this tech being like, this is real. This is a problem we need to deal with. So the first version I tried to write in 2019 was actually just a warning. And it was a warning trying to tell people there's a tidal wave coming. You need to be prepared. That book was terrible. I finished it. I gave it to some people. It was really bad. It was not good. I was not ready to be writing a book at that time. So I put it on the shelf. And I kept coming back to it, knowing, writing a book has always been something I've dreamed of doing. And I felt like this is a topic where I was uniquely positioned to talk about it. And when I really realized that this book needed to be written now was after ChatGPT came out, after everything here started, and everybody started becoming interested in AI. But it really started with my friends coming to me and asking questions and trying to find answers. And then this realization that the media ecosystem around this had kind of polarized into two camps. One camp was that of fear, saying this new technology that's here, it's terrifying, it's scary, it's going to kill all of us. We need to be afraid of it. And another camp saying to them, AI is perfect. It's the new messiah. It's going to save all of us. It's going to usher us into this utopian future. And I really felt like from my research that didn't reflect the academic reality. That didn't reflect what the people studying it were feeling. And that was that AI is incredibly powerful. It has the potential to go in either of these directions, but it's much more complicated than that. And it needs more nuance to it. And these people deserve to understand it. And I felt like that wasn't what was coming through in the conversations we were having. And in academia, when I looked to that and felt like those conversations were being had in the academy, I realized that they weren't being shared with the everyday person. They weren't being written in ways that my friends could understand. And I knew that because I'd give them the books that I love and they wouldn't read them. Or they'd say, I started, but the language was just inaccessible. I didn't understand what they were talking about. They were talking about this guy Hegel, and I have no clue what that meant. And I realized, yeah, we need to be writing for you. We need to serve you. We are public servants at the end of the day. And that really kind of catalyzed this new understanding of what this book had to be. Of the book shouldn't be a warning like the first one I wrote. It should be a vessel for people to understand AI and to capture the complexity of it and not predetermine where it's going to go, but give us the understanding we need to understand how it's affecting our life right now and what it is. And that really is what birthed this idea and what made me realize now is the time, because I think right now we're in the fog of war. And this book was supposed to be a bit of that, mission to help clear the fog a little bit.
Now, in the book, you bring in stories about people who had an impact on the evolution of AI. And I thought what would be interesting is to focus on a few of them and just talk a little bit. And the first one takes us back to the year 780. And I'm not sure how the last part of this fellow's name is pronounced, so I'll leave it to you to introduce him. His first name is Muhammad.
Yes, oh, I get the last name wrong all the time too. And I've been told 100 different pronunciations of it. Um, it is al-Khwarizmi, I think it's the one I go with,
Yeah.
and I am sorry to people of Arab descent who will read the name and tell me how badly I'm butchering it. I should learn how to say it better. Um, he is a fascinating historical figure. And one of the reasons he's fascinating, as we talk about in the book, the name of the chapter is the household name that nobody knows, because he is a household name, which makes it even stranger that I can't pronounce it. And he's the one who invented the algorithm, which is why his name is so important, because the Latinized, made to be easier for an English speaker to say, his name is algorithmi, which becomes algorithm. And I find him so fascinating because I knew when I started writing this book that one of the major issues with the way I think we talk about AI or try and teach about it is we start in the middle of the story. We usually start by explaining how deep learning works, how these technologies work. And when you do that, you miss a lot of the important context. You miss a lot of the important fundamentals of what AI is. So I wanted to start back at the beginning because, as I say, he invented the algorithm. We talk about an algorithm so much, but most people don't really know what it is when you ask them. If you say, what is an algorithm, they can't tell you. So his story kind of reminds us that all these things we take for granted needed to be invented at some point and needed a human to make the decision to do it. So what he invented, what he was dealing with, was a problem in medieval Persia that inheritance in the Quran is incredibly important, but incredibly complicated. Your inheritance follows a strict set of rules that has all these variables, like how many kids you have, how many debtors you have, all these complicated things that interact with one another. So it was very difficult to get right. He, being a mathematician, invented, well, first off, he invented algebra to help him solve this problem. So he's the man who invented algebra. So if there's any high school kids listening, that's who you have to blame for that class you hate. So he invents algebra, and then he uses algebra to create a system that anybody can follow. That all they need to do is enter in the variables, how many debtors and all this, follow the instructions he's given, and then it will spit out how much each person is to get upon your death. And that's what an algorithm is. It is a set of instructions that, when followed, will produce a result or produce the desired result. We tend to talk about it in math terms also as having variables. So you add in the variables and then it produces your result. So the TikTok algorithm is just that. It's a algorithm that, given the variables of your watch time, your like history, all of that, will feed you videos that the intended result is to keep you on the app for as long as possible. That's what these algorithms are. And that's what AI is. And he's a really just fascinating character in general. It's a difficult one, though, too, because we don't know that much about his life, which I find really interesting when we start thinking about, just data in general, which comes in later in the book, of how important this person was in his time and how important he is to where we are now, yet how little we actually know about him is so fascinating to me.
Mhm. The next person is Ada Lovelace.
Yeah, Ada's, I think, the coolest character in this book and the one I was the happiest to talk about because to me, as you know, I come from a computer science family. She was a figure of, our conversations. And I always thought that the story of her was well known. And then I discovered that she's not even mentioned on the history of computing Wikipedia page, which breaks my heart. Because for those of you who don't know, Ada or Ada, depending on how you pronounce it, another one I need to get right eventually. Um, Ada was a woman in the mid 1800s, so around 1850s was when she was doing her most important work. And yeah, that's right. And what's interesting is that she was the first computer programmer, and she programmed the first computer 100 years before it was invented. Her work was so foundational to the idea of computing because she was working aside this legendary and absolute madman mathematician named Charles Babbage. And Babbage was the greatest mathematician of his time. But he was oh so crazy. And he was very upset with at the time we didn't have calculators like you and me do. They didn't have a phone they could whip out to do their calculations. They had to use people. They used people they called computers. So when he was doing calculations, he'd give the calculations to computers, they would do them for him. But they weren't as smart as him. So they would mess up, and that would mess up his equations. And that made him so angry that one day he was like, you know what? I'm going to build a machine to do this for me. I'm going to mechanize this just because I can't stand these people who aren't as smart as me. So that was his mission, was to basically build a calculator. And he pulled young Ada into this, she's just brilliant. And the amazing part is what he thought he had built, what he thought he had designed was a calculator. When she saw it, she realized that he didn't understand what he had built, that what he had built or what he had designed, because it never actually got built, was a computer. It was a general purpose computer that could be programmed to take any input. But then Charles Babbage gave her the opportunity to translate a talk he had given so it could be published. And in that translation, in the notes of that translation, she wrote her own ideas about what he had done. And she also wrote the first computer code in those notes. And it's amazing because those notes are actually longer than the original paper she was asked to translate. And in them is the foundations of modern computing. What she philosophized there was these ideas about how the computer could be used to do all sorts of things. Starting there, she talked about how this machine, if it was built, could be used to write music, that you could train it to understand the mathematical connections between notes and music that create symphonies and harmonies, and it could write its own music. And although that machine never got built, although her code never got run, it became the foundation of the dreams of other very important people like Alan Turing, who actually in his famous work on artificial intelligence argues against the ghost of Lady Lovelace and was deeply inspired by Ada Lovelace.
And Alan Turing is the next person I was going to talk about. For those folks who may recall the movie The Imitation Game, Alan Turing is the fellow that they profile in the movie and the work he did during the Second World War. Can you talk a little bit about his place in the evolution of AI?
Yeah, Alan Turing is beyond important in AI. He's considered to be the founding father of AI, also the founding father of computing. So a massive legacy. And I like to point out here with this too, it's interesting because I love the movie The Imitation Game, but I was really a bit heartbroken when I started reading more about Turing and learning more about him for this book and found out that that movie, although it's so important for drawing attention to what he did, is amazingly inaccurate. And it's not at all how his systems that he was building were working. But more importantly, the man himself is actually, I think, far more interesting. But I know why they made the film like this, because in the film, they present him as being completely misunderstood by his peers, like outcast. He comes in, has these ideas, and everybody's like, no, this guy's crazy. We all hate him. In reality, Turing was just as weird as they present him as being an incredibly weird man. Everybody knew how brilliant he was. And even though he was weird, it was kind of, that thing where you have people around you who are incredibly weird, but they're so innocent that you're like, he's just a weird duck. We love him. That's kind of how people actually were about Turing. Like, it was, I like one thing they did not include in the film is that he had a coffee mug that he loved and he was convinced was the best coffee mug. And because he loved this coffee mug, he was convinced that everybody else at Bletchley Park loved this coffee mug too and would want to steal his favorite coffee mug. So when he wasn't using it, he would chain it to the radiator. And I don't think I need to tell you, nobody else wanted to steal his coffee mug. He was the only one who thought that. But he is a very interesting character because being the brilliant man he was, he first off invented the principles that made contemporary computing possible. After Lovelace and Babbage failed to receive funding, no one really tried to do what they were doing again until Turing. And he wrote this paper which proposed I always forget the name of the paper because it's another very difficult name, but it proposed a Turing machine. And the Turing machine was a hypothetical digital computer. which is what we use now, basically processing on zeros and ones. And that kind of reignited the quest for computing in general. He then took some of this work, went to World War II, as the Imitation Game looks at, is credited for being the major factor that, in a sense, won the Allies the war, breaking the Enigma code, building the machines that broke it. Unfortunately, the machine he built then, which the movie tends to say, was the first computer, was not the first computer. It was a very amazing technological device, but it was not actually a computer. He worked on some of the early digital computers after that. And this is important for our story because AI and its development really stems out of these inventions, the things he was working on, the things he was writing about, because people started saying, wow, we're building these machines that seem so powerful. Could they be intelligent? Could we build a machine that could be intelligent? And Oxford's journal Mind eventually put out a call for papers on this, answering the question, could there be intelligent machines? Can machines think? And Turing responded to this call in a philosophy paper and wrote what is now the founding of artificial intelligence, which was a paper on that question, can machines think, where he proposes that the answer is yes. And he basically turns the question on its head a little bit and presents this definition of AI, where he, in a sense, is saying that what we're trying to do is create a machine that can behave in a way that humans imagine it to be intelligent. Because asking if it thinks, we don't really know what that is. But he wanted to ask, can a machine be intelligent? Can it act in ways that humans consider to be intelligent? And I like his way of framing it because it didn't necessarily say that it was a human thing. He was like, will we imagine intelligence? The same way we look at our cat or our dog and they do something, we say, wow, Buddy's really intelligent. He was wondering, could a machine do that too? Because when we just use a word processor or, a pretty direct thing, we never say, that's intelligent. We go, that's really good. But could a machine hit this point? And he answered that he thought it could. And he proposed that he kind of lit this torch of saying AI is possible. And he started doing his early research into building artificially intelligent systems. Uh, Unfortunately, or I'll say two sides to this, I think the really cool part that we talk about in the book that's important is that he divided a line between the human soul and the human machinery, of being the machinery being our body and the soul being this driver that gives us the ability to love, the ability to feel, what one might call consciousness. And he was not interested in building that. He was not interested in that at all. What he wanted to do was build the machinery, because he saw the soul as driving the body, as driving the brain. And the brain is the thing that can think. The soul is the thing that drives it to think. So what he wanted to do was build what he called mansions for the soul. And the idea was you could build this machinery that had the ability to think, and then in the absence of a soul, a human could push it. A human could give it direction. So if you think of that with, say, ChatGPT, if we consider that to be AI, it would be this idea that ChatGPT isn't out there, thinking on its own and coming up with questions for itself. It needs the human to give it the question. It needs the human, in a sense, to lend us the soul and think it, and then it engages its thinking machinery to produce a outcome. The really sad and tragic part about Turing's life, which is a life just marred in tragedy, as we talk about in this book, is that he died incredibly young because he was a gay man living in England at a time when that was illegal. And when the government found out, they chemically castrated him in a very terrible way that went terribly wrong. There are still a lot of questions over whether or not he killed himself or whether or not he died in an accident. It's not as clear cut as some popular history books like to say that he just killed himself. The actual serious historians on the matter raise questions about that. But there's no doubt that he died because of the chemical castration. So that's a tragedy too, because we never really got to see the fruition of his work. We never got to see the completion of the things he was working on. But without him, the field of artificial intelligence wouldn't have been set into motion in the way it is now.
So Alan Turing is thinking of computers as a tool that humans can use, is basically what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah, he thought they were a tool that we need to push, we need to use. They don't just exist out there on their own, which I think is a very important divide to make, especially at this time when people often feel like their chatbot systems are alive, that they aren't.
Well, when you say that, and I've used ChatGPT, and I'll ask the computer to do something, and it will come back to me in a very colloquial kind of talking. And then at the end, I feel obligated to say thank you to the machine for providing the information, which is the weird thing about all of this. There are other people that you profile in the book, and some of the names people will know, like Geoffrey Hinton and Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. One of the things I wanted to move on to was a sense from your perspective, are there any big players in the game right now? Any names that we might recognize?
So right now it's an interesting one because the field is pretty wide open,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of new people emerging and trying to develop themselves and put themselves into a certain place. And I don't know if there's anybody now who I really think has solidified themselves. I think Sam Altman likes to think he has. I'm honestly quite curious about the future of OpenAI, if it will survive in the way they think it will. Um, I think one of the more interesting figures right now, who I only touch on in the book in a footnote, because one of the things about this book was it was meant not to be an exhaustive history. I wanted to use history in a way to, describe the phenomenons, to describe
Yeah.
the things I felt like people needed to know. So there were some characters that are incredibly important that just didn't make it in. And one is Lee Kuhn, who's again another founding father of AI alongside Geoffrey Hinton, and his work, he just left Meta, actually. He was the chief AI scientist at Facebook and Meta for a long time. And he just left to form his own company. And I think his work is just absolutely brilliant in the way he thinks about what we need to design, how we need to do it. He's a huge advocate for open source models too. And I think that his work is going to become ever more important. And his work on what we call world modeling, of this idea that LLMs are not, like large language models like ChatGPT, are not the end all be all. And instead, we need to pair this with an ability to model the world around us. But I also think when we talk about like what I like to call big man history, and as a sociologist, we tend to not like to talk about big man history. This idea that history is produced by these individual figures. I think that this type of history tends to happen in a sense that these figures that I talk about here are important. Like Steve Jobs changed the course of reality, changed the course of our world. But they tend to come at moments of decision that they knock us into a specific paradigm, I think. So these big people tend to be the person that, create the barriers, that create the boundaries. And I think right now in AI, the field has cracked so far open that it's difficult for anybody to establish themselves in the way
Hmm.
that Geoffrey Hinton, say, did,
Yeah.
or Alan Turing did, where really there was just so much fertile pasture and you needed one leader to kind of define where we were going to go. And then now there's just so much smaller stuff going on that it becomes much more now a big social game, a big problem of hundreds of thousands of people coming together to produce this figure that's going to come out of it.
Setting aside those of us who may use AI to ask it to do something, where does artificial intelligence play a role in the lives of all of us without us even thinking about it?
Yeah, so AI is increasingly becoming infrastructure. And it's this interesting thing where when you think about products, products are things you meaningfully interact with. They're individual, things like ChatGPT is a product, Gemini is a product. Infrastructure is something that you don't have a choice to interact with. It is a backbone for systems. And AI has, over the last 10 years, been more and more embedded into our infrastructure. So even, for example, we are doing this interview on Zoom. My data, my voice data, my image data is being packaged and compressed and then shot over the internet to you. It is extremely likely that that compression algorithm is an AI system or involves AI and has AI involved in it. So we're seeing stuff like that more and more baked into our society, just the ways our computers function, the fact that, we talk to our computers more to give them directions. That voice software that's reading that is AI. So we're seeing AI become more of a backbone into computing. And one of the things that we talk about in this book is how that actually affects the infrastructure of computing. because we tend to see that every time there's a major development like this, computing shifts to take a new form. So, for example, the invention of the Intel 4004 processor led from the movement of big mainframe computers into desktop computers that we know today. And then the construction of better cellular networks and ARM chips led to mobile computing. We're seeing the same kind of thing with AI right now, where this development of a technology that's a backbone technology is leading to the development of new computing infrastructure. And that's something that's difficult to get away from. And that's something that doesn't take on that human-esque nature of AI, which is why when people think of AI, they tend to think about the chat GPTs, they tend to think about the robots. But AI is just really these complex algorithms that have the ability to process data and change themselves without our direction. They can do stuff that we didn't tell them to do. They can learn how to take action. That has much more effect on the way we live our everyday lives than we might realize. And that's only increasing now. And it's really difficult to predict what the new ways that's going to come into play will be. And that's one major way. We see it in healthcare. It's having massive effects. I mean, they're already using it to develop new drugs. So that's something that you might not even realize when you start taking new drugs in the future, that they might have been originally developed by an AI system. Then humans, have a massive place in that process. But even in ways that's changing our life right now, we might not think of. The one that makes me the most nervous is warfare. Ukraine is a testing ground for AI systems. There is massive autonomous weaponry being used there. We're already at the point where robots are making the decision over whether or not to pull a trigger without a human in the loop. That is terrifying, and that is progressing right now. And there's a very good chance, I think of, these massive industrial revolutions that we like to talk about. Each industrial revolution changed warfare. So there's this interesting moment before World War I where you had these other smaller conflicts where people started experimenting. We had, Gatling guns come into play. We had machine guns start to be used, and they had massive, terrifying effects on the battlefield, but they didn't result in the countries of the world sitting down and having a conversation about what are the rules here. Because if we end up in a massive conflict, we're going to overdevelop. We're going to, design weapons using these industrial technologies that will be horrifying. I think we're in a similar moment right now of we're having this fourth industrial revolution. These conflicts, like the conflict in Ukraine, we're seeing, these technologies start to be used. We're starting to see their potential. And I really think that we need to sit down and have those conversations now, because if we end up in a big global conflict and there's no rules in place about how we develop autonomous weapons beforehand, you can't really expect us to develop them in the middle of a war. So that's one that really makes me nervous about an effect it will have on our lives.
Now, in your conversations with people around you, do you run into some who fear where we are going with this? And I go back to the Terminator movies and the fact that Arnold Schwarzenegger's character was going around helping people get back control from the machines.
I like to tell people the Terminator scenario is not the scenario we need to be afraid of. It's this really interesting, difficult thing because there's a lot of stuff that we need to be worried about with AI. A lot of it is very foundational and, in a sense, very boring. And then you can come out and be like, the Terminator is coming. This is what we need to fear. And it's scary. It's easy to understand. And that's what we fixate on as being the potential issues. I don't really think that's what we have to worry about. Most people in my field don't think that's what we have to worry about. But there are other issues. There are major issues that relate to stuff such as, data and privacy. Those are huge because AI runs on data. Data is produced by surveillance. It's the reason why we have increasingly more microphones, why we have increasingly more cameras all around us, LiDAR sensors. Our computers are collecting and processing more and more data, more and more information on us. And that is only going to increase as we make AI more prevalent in our society. So there are major questions there about privacy that need to be answered, about how we handle this data, about who gets access to it, and about how it's treated as an economic resource too. That's one of the biggest problems we actually have to deal with, is understanding what data is as an economic resource and how we deal with that. Because that's not an easy question. It doesn't fit into the economic models we currently have. And different countries and different regions are developing completely different economic models for how we understand data. That's a massive problem. We have to deal with, job crises from it, about people being automated. One of the bigger ones is people being de-skilled. So you might still have a job, but your skills become more precarious, which makes you much more susceptible to manipulation or to bad job practices. So there's lots of little issues like that, which are really scary. But what I want to do with this book is provide an insight into where those are coming from, because it's not a deterministic. It's not that we invented AI and this is going to happen. It depends on how we put it into our society, how we apply it. And that's really what I want to get people thinking about, is asking questions about how do we do this? What kind of future do we want to see with AI, and how do we get there? So it can be really scary, but I'd like to think of it less as a Terminator and more of the steam engine, and more of asking questions about this is going to reshape our society. How exactly do we want it to reshape our society?
What kind of role, aside from asking questions, what kind of role does the average person play in the evolution of AI?
I think the average person, so first off, we need to educate ourselves. We need to understand, you know, what is going on here. But I also put in that place that not everybody needs to. It's kind of not everybody has the time to do it. If you don't want to do it, you don't necessarily have to. But I think the average person should. The average person should gain this ability and should be asking questions, yeah, about how it's affecting their life, how it's affecting their work. But it is an interesting one because as you say, what is the purpose of this? Like, what can you actually do? It's difficult to push against. It's difficult to fight against. But I think in developing our opinions, in developing our understanding, we gain the ability to understand what our position is in it. And your position will likely be different than my position. Each person will have a different thing that they can do. For me, it's doing the work I do now. For a steel worker or for a union worker, it might be doing this and realizing, oh, I should become more involved in my union and more involved in understanding labor rights and advocating for these things. So everybody, I think, has a different path in this, but I think everybody's path begins with education about what we are dealing with.
When you look down the road, how do we make sure that AI remains a tool that we can use as opposed to it being used on us?
I think one of the most important parts of that is democracy, just in general. And
Yeah.
democracy was designed or built so that the people could have a say in this, so the people could hold, technologies, companies, and governments accountable. And I think we need to be demanding that. And the thing is, right now, we're at an interesting point where we get to define the regulatory guidelines, we get to define the policy. And I think a lot of people think that when we talk about regulation and policy, a lot of tech people get scared and say, don't throw a wet blanket on us, don't overregulate us. And there is overregulation. That is a thing. Regulation can be too specific, it can be burdensome, and it can kill innovation. But when I think about policy, what I think about is creating guidelines, creating guardrails that say, here is a box you can play within. And what good policy should do is it should collect the will of the people. It should understand the collective values of the people that it is meant to represent and create a box that when a system is built within it will reflect those values. And if
Mhm.
the values is working for us, we need to create policy that will, promote AI development that works for us, that works within our values, because otherwise we end up in free market driven solutions. And what happens there is what we saw with the internet, where surveillance advertising became the number one way companies were making money. It got pushed towards predatory practices. It got pushed towards giving young women eating disorders, radicalizing people, all these negative externalities, because there weren't guidelines to say, hey, if we go in this direction, if we build in this direction, which is technically the most profitable, we're going to push ourselves into a competition which makes us so we have to do these things. We should aim in a different direction which promotes our core values, and we can still have competition within it. And I think it also, from tech people that I work with or talk with, engineers actually want this in a sense, because they don't want over regulation. They don't want to be told specific things like your AI model can only be this size or all that, but they want to build stuff that helps humanity. No one gets into engineering to build a system that's going to give a young woman an eating disorder. No person goes and gets a PhD from Stanford to go and work, on surveillance advertising technology. That's not their dream. And I always talk about in Canada, Waterloo, the top hires out of Waterloo for computer science are, finance companies, surveillance advertising companies, and in Canada, mainly porn companies, because we've allowed this market to develop in that way. That's where the money is. That's where it gets pushed towards. So I think with AI, what we need to do is provide good guardrails that allow room for development, but create the idea of, what are the values we want this thing to be developed within.
Now, your book is getting a lot of attention from what I gather, and I'm wondering what kind of feedback you've had. It hasn't been at all that long, and we are recording this particular podcast in December of 2025. So, are you getting any feedback at this point?
Yeah, we've been getting a bit trickling in. People have kind of just started finishing up, just returning it. So it's been really nice. I think one of the interesting things is the different groups who have been reading it and hearing how different groups have been reacting to it. So I kind of like that a lot of the technical people that read it say that at the beginning, they're like, oh, it's cool, it's interesting, but it's mostly stuff they've already learned about. And then they get to the third act, which is in the third act, I talk about how AI is affecting society now and the major threats and fears we have. And tech people tend to really like the third act. They tend to really enjoy that. I found business people have really enjoyed the book in general, of these ideas of, they're dealing with everybody coming in telling them they need to add AI into their company, and it's helped them understand AI. The one that has made me the happiest, the best reviews or the best emails I've got have been from retirees and senior citizens. I have friends whose grandparents have read the book because, they met me when I was a kid, and I've received emails from them talking about, how they've been so scared of this thing called AI and they don't understand it. And they read the book and now they feel like they understand what AI is. And they feel like they have an understanding of this thing that their kids are talking about at the dinner table or their grandkids are talking about. And that was really powerful for me because that was who I wrote the book for. I
Hmm.
wrote the book for people who, don't know anything or know a little bit, but want to know more, want to understand what's going on. So that's been really heartwarming. And, it's nice to get emails from my academic colleagues saying they read the book and enjoyed it. But really getting an email from those people has been the most meaningful reviews I could get.
Now, do you see yourself writing Artificially Intelligent 2.0?
There might be one or two books in the work to follow that up. There's a couple ideas there. So I definitely think there's more to be said. There
Hmm.
was a lot that I left on the cutting room floor because I really believe in having books that are concise, that you have a mission, you do your mission. And I don't know if you remember this about me, but I am dyslexic. I'm extremely dyslexic. I'm now an advocate in Canada for dyslexia and dyslexic rights. And because of that, to me, reading has always been something very valuable. It's almost like a commodity that I don't have as much reading time as I'd like because my brain will just turn off or it's difficult for me to do. So I've always valued kind of conciseness. And I know that's not the way everybody feels about writing. There's amazing books that are massively long and go on huge tangents. But I really value something that values my time in that sense. That says, I'm going to give you what
Yeah.
you need to hear, what you need to know in this format. So that's how I tried to write this book. Because of that, there's a lot of really cool things, amazing things that I did a lot of research on that some people on my team helped really flesh out that didn't end up in there. So when I finished it, I very much knew there's more stories left to be told. I think right now there's two follow-up ideas. This one might come later, but I really do think there's actually a room to do a similar book on robotics and the
Hmm.
history of robotics, especially now that we move more into the robot age with Elon Musk and all these other innovators putting out humanoid robots and us seeing them more and more available because AI has made robotics more practical. So I think that history might be the next one.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Let me direct this message to those who are listening in. So, whether you use AI or not, I suggest you pick up a copy of this book. Not only will you get a better understanding of the topic, but you will enjoy the read. The book is called Artificially Intelligent, The Very Human Story of AI. And David, I want to thank you very much for this. and all the best going forward.
Well, thank you so much for having me in, Dave. It's been a great conversation.
If today's conversation tells us anything, it's that the story of AI isn't just a technology story. It's a human one. A story shaped by choices, ethics, imagination, and responsibility. My thanks to David Eliot, author of Artificially Intelligent, the very human story of AI. As always, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and consider rating and subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. It helps others discover the show. This episode was recorded in December 2025. I'll be back soon with another conversation.
The theme music for the podcast is Stasis Oasis, written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of the episodes, please send a note to thekingstonianpodcast@gmail.com. For details on upcoming guests, follow us on Facebook. The Kingstonian Podcast is hosted by Dave Cunningham and produced in Kingston, Ontario, Canada.